It was a tough week. The Louisville men's and women's basketball teams will recap this weekend's action on this episode of the Locked On Cast. Stay tuned.
You are Locked On Louisville, your daily podcast on the Louisville Cardinals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, everyone? Welcome into another episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by StatHero. StatHero is reshaping the way you play fantasy sports. Dozens of house-based games to play daily. No sharks, no funny. Your skill versus the lineups you choose. Sign up today at stathero.com/lockedon. As always, I'm your host, Dalton Pence. I serve as a credential media member for Cardinal Sports Zone, and I also do some PA announcer work for the university in various sports. I want to say thank you, as always, for making us your first listen of the day. And just a reminder, the Locked On Louisville podcast is free on all streaming services, 5 days a week, your team every day. We're going to recap this weekend's action, beginning with the men's basketball loss on Senior Day to Virginia. We will discuss how the first half deficit was one that the Cardinals could never overcome. And then we will transition into the women's basketball, the fourth quarter debacle for the women's basketball team against Miami in the ACC Tournament quarterfinals. And then we will wrap up the episode with a weekly mailbag segment. We'll start off with the men's basketball team, a loss to Virginia on Senior Day. I think that it was one of those coming in, not a lot of people were truly optimistic about this one. Not only has this team, kind of underperformed in terms of expectations at the beginning of the season, but also, it's Virginia. It's one of those where, you always feel like you're going to get your worst game against Virginia just because of the polarizingly different styles of play. And it seems like Virginia is Louisville's kryptonite. They've only won a handful of times against the Cavaliers since joining the ACC. The Cardinals actually started out decent in this one in opposition to the first matchup, to where I think it took over like 15 gameplay to get over the 10-point mark. Louisville was leading this game 12-11. Early on, I think at the under 12 timeout, the Cardinals actually had the lead, and from there on out, it was all Virginia. I mean, it was all Cavaliers from that point forward. It got to the point where I believe it was 36-17, and that was the halftime deficit. And Louisville was really never able to overcome that. They started the second half on a 7-0 run, so they cut the lead to 10. Virginia kept pushing it out a little further, and it was a little bit of a back and forth until the very end. I think that I think it was like 64-55 with like 4.5 or maybe even 5 minutes to go. And I told myself, if Louisville doesn't cut this lead to a single possession by the 2-minute mark, it's going to be too far gone. And unfortunately, Virginia was able to push it out just a little bit further, reminiscent of how the first matchup went. Virginia got a big first half lead. Louisville exerted all of their energy and effort towards, cutting that deficit and getting back to tie the game. And unfortunately, once they kind of got within striking distance, Virginia was away. This one wasn't necessarily as close as the first matchup, but I still think the Cardinals battled. I was extremely impressed, as always, with Sydney Curry. Man, hats off to Sydney Curry. Not hat off. You don't want a single hat off because he deserves more than just one single hat off. But hats off all across the fan base for Sydney Curry. 34 minutes for the Cards on Saturday. 9 for 13 from the field. Had a game-high 24 points. 14 rebounds to go along with that. What he's been able to do in the last month and a half of ACC play has been remarkable. It gives me a lot of positivity heading into next season. Alan Thomas, a good friend of the show, good friend of Cardinal Zone, writer for the stateoflouisville.com. His company T-Shirt Hooligan has a NIL deal with Sydney Curry, and he said for the record on the Cardinal Sports Zone podcast last night that he believes that Sydney Curry will ultimately be back. Hopefully that is the case. What he was able to do in the past month or so of the season, like I said, it was extremely dominant. I love the fact that he was coming into his own as a scorer. We'll see how things work out with the new head coach and whether or not he's the primary number one scoring option next season, but he's definitely a complimentary scoring option at the very least. So extremely excited for him. Overall, after that, not necessarily much to applaud per se. Malik Williams in his last game at the KFC Yum Center scored in double figures. He had 10.7 rebounds. And I know that, this necessarily hasn't been the greatest season for Malik. It's been kind of up and down with, the seemingly suspensions and stuff like that. I do want to reiterate how appreciative and grateful I am of Malik for sticking it out in Louisville, going through, I think, 4 head coaches in his 5 seasons at Louisville. Extremely resilient. Appreciate his willingness to, double down on his commitment to this university. I know that, the recency bias is one heck of a drug, and, people choose to I guess, remember the most recent things that have gone on. So people will remember him for his, suspensions and stuff like that. But I'll tell you straight up, the only thing that I will remember Malik Williams for here at Louisville is his resiliency. And that's, I'm not saying I won't remember other great qualities of his, but I'm very, very glad that he stuck it out here. Wish him the best. Wish Noah Locke, Mason Faulkner, Jared West the best as well. Although, might not necessarily been what they were envisioning and hoping for during their time here at Louisville. Definitely appreciate their contributions. Wish them best of luck in the future. But back to this game against Virginia, kind of a tough matchup to win. Virginia shot at 58% from behind the arc, only 7 of 12. I think it's Beekman is his name. He had 15 points. Armand Franklin had 13. But the star for the Cavaliers on Saturday was Caden Shedrick, 6'11" sophomore, averaging about 7 and 5. In this game, he had a team-high 20 points for the Virginia Cavaliers. Also dished in 5 rebounds. So ultimately, and for Louisville's sake, it was a little bit questionable from their shot selection standpoint. They were 8 for 23 from behind the arc. I mean, that's 35%. That's a respectable. But with Sidney Curry as dominant as he was on Saturday, there was a little concern with the willingness to let the three-pointers fly when they weren't necessarily falling that much. I felt like some shots were rushed. Offense got a little stagnant because of the willingness and I guess you could say I don't really even know the word I'm truly looking for here. I guess the willingness and it's almost like prioritizing the perimeter shot. That just doesn't feel like, that's what this team needs to do to see a lot of success offensively. But ultimately, it was a respectable game, kind of on par with what I thought was going to happen. Louisville lost by 10 points, which I think on the Friday episode of the show, like a 7 to 8 point loss. I could be wrong, but I knew I predicted a loss. I'm just not exactly sure about how many points. But ultimately, it is what it is. The team will turn their attention to Georgia Tech in the first round of the ACC tournament. That game will be played on Tuesday evening. We will preview that matchup on tomorrow's episode of the show. But for now, let's to the women's basketball side of things, where their ACC tournament run was cut drastically short after a very, very tough fourth quarter debacle against the Miami on Friday evening. We will discuss what all went wrong for the Cardinals in that matchup after we talk about a couple of our sponsors. First, our friends at BetOnline. Football might be over for the season, but basketball is in full steam for both pro and college hoops. Latest odds, totals, player performance props to where the next fired coach is going to land. BetOnline.net is the number one spot for all of your sports betting needs. It remains the best spot for all of your sports scores, and news this season. And it's not just basketball. BetOnline.net is your source for hockey, boxing, and you have the right to the Olympic coverage and information. Head to the or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. BetOnline is where the game starts. And as you probably already know by now, March Madness is only a couple weeks away. that means you need to start thinking now about where you're going to brackets this season. Are you going for the usual, or are you looking for the best? We've done our homework here, and we are running our bracket on RunYourPool.com. Along with standard brackets, RunYourPool offers game types like Survivor or Pick X, then to edit scoring, and they offer more intel to make your picks. All stuff you won't find at ESPN or CBS. Clearly, we believe Run Your Pool, because like I said, we're running our brackets there ourselves. There's no truer test than that. If you want to play against us for a shot at a cash prize, you can join us at runyourpool.com/lockedon. And while you're there, create your own pool for your friends and family. Enter the code PUREMADNESS, all word, at checkout for $10 off your custom pool. All the rules and details will be available there. That's runyourpool.com/lockedon for your chance to win a cash prize. As always, thanks again for making Louisville your first listen every day. Now, make sure to check out Locked On Bracket Breakdown March 14th right here on the Locked On Louisville podcast feed and YouTube channel. College basketball experts Chris Gordy, Andy Patton, expert Lee Sterling give you in-depth breakdowns, plural, on every matchup. Transitioning over into the women's basketball side of things, we're going to discuss the loss against Miami. It was a tough fourth quarter. It looked like, for the most part, after three, and I guess you could really say after 3.5, because I think with like 5:45 left in the game, the Cardinals had a 15-point lead, and the rest, unfortunately, is a little bit more to be desired. I'm sorry, I forget. There we go. Senior forward, she's listed as a forward. Senior forward Destiny Harden went on a personal 15-0 run in the game against Louisville, and the Miami Hurricanes won on a last-second shot, 61-59. Now, this was a classic case of kind of letting off the gas. I felt like ultimately the Cardinals got outscored 23-7 in the fourth quarter, and that comes after them, winning 2 of the 3 quarters. The second quarter was actually a tie, but ultimately I wouldn't necessarily say truly impressed, because I think that this team could have done a little bit more in the first 3 quarters, but they were handling business. I was thinking to myself, okay, well, continue to stay on the gas, get it to where it's, outside of striking distance, and let's advance to Saturday. And I think that Friday night was the clear epitome of not being able to, let your foot off the gas, come March, come postseason time. I mean, Miami was a team that entered the ACC tournament on the bubble. They ended up beating, they beat Louisville. They ended up beating Notre Dame on Saturday. And then, was it Georgia Tech? One of the I'll be completely honest. I kind of zoned out from the ACC tournament after Louisville lost. I was like, well, it is what it is. But ultimately, they got to the ACC championship, lost to NC State, but the intensity that they played with, the urgency, and almost kind of like a desperation feel. Credit to Destiny Harden for going out and absolutely balling out the last 5 minutes of game time in that game. But ultimately, I felt like the Cardinals got a little bit careless with the basketball, especially on the last possession. It was just a matter of not being good enough down the stretch. Louisville was 33% from behind the arc, 38 or 39% from the field. Miami just a little bit better in both categories, 44% from the field, 38% from behind the arc. Louisville actually shot 13 more free throws and out-rebounded Miami by 7 points. And ultimately, at the end of the day, it was it was just one of those instances to where, if you were to strictly look at the stats, you were like, you would believe that Louisville won this game probably by a comfortable margin. I was definitely wrong. I predicted this to be a double-digit win for Louisville, and I was incorrect. But I think that this really should serve as a wake-up call for the team heading into postseason play. Or not really into postseason play, we're already in postseason play, going into the NCAA tournament. And we will discuss whether or not, or how this affects the team's case for a 1 seed And I believe either tomorrow's episode or Thursday's episode, we will break down the Cardinals' case for a 1 seed come Selection Monday. But this does make things a little bit interesting. They're going to need some help from teams that play other teams inside of the top 7. I think that LSU losing on Friday helps. Iowa State losing to Baylor last Monday helps. But Baylor's right there. And if they win the Big 12 tournament, it's hard to see a situation where the Cardinals remain on that 1 seed line. So, but we will go more in depth into that later on in the week. Look, I saw I guess you could say kind of the meltdown from the fan base, because there's no way to spin it. This is a bad loss. No disrespect to Miami, but when you take context into consideration, excuse me, I got the hiccups, and you consider the fact that, I mean, the team was up by 15 points with less than 6 minutes to go, and we're talking about the team that was up is a top 5 team in the country. So Louisville has to finish out games like that. I feel like what's been kind of an issue, not necessarily at all times, it's either kind of one or the other. It's where Louisville either starts out a little sluggish and kind of has to fight back, or they struggle in the fourth quarter to where they kind of give up a lead. Now, obviously, those things don't kind of go all the way hand in hand. Obviously, at times it's, I mean, it's sometimes one thing shows up and the other thing doesn't. Like Notre Dame, they started out extremely hot. In other games, like UConn back in December, they started out extremely cold. So, I mean, this is a team that can make an extremely deep run. Do not get me wrong. This is this is a premier Jeff Walz' team. I mean, a very, very solid defensively, one of his best defensive teams since he's been here at Louisville. Haley Van Lith is playing very well throughout the ACC slate. Emily Ingsler, very, very solid. Kiana Smith seems to be putting things together again. And so far down the line, I think that really you have to just kind of take this on the chin and go back to the drawing board, because you still have a whole new season, so to speak. But I think that this is just kind of a reminder that, hey, look, if you don't play your hardest and if you don't give your best for 40 minutes in a game, it doesn't matter how you played 35 if you kind of play a little sluggish in the last 5. And credit Miami for having the urgency. But ultimately, it was a tough debacle at the end, and hopefully this kind of serves as a little bit of a wake-up call, and you hope this stings a little bit, because that can fuel the motivation to make sure that you don't just go through the motions at the very end of the game, that you keep your attention to the fine, small details of the basketball game. So ultimately, I'm not necessarily too awful worried, because I know what this team is capable of. It's not encouraging, obviously, losing in that fashion, but with the way the team had been playing leading up to the end of the season with wins against Virginia Tech and Notre Dame, it's obvious that this team can play with anyone, but they have to, stay focused and stay, I guess stay focused is what I'm trying to get to. So we will continue to talk about women's basketball throughout the week, like I mentioned, about their case for a number 1 seed later on in one of the episodes in the week. The final segment of today's show, however, will be dedicated to the Monday mailbag. There's a couple of interesting questions I want to dive into and answer. We will do that here in just a second after we talk about our friends and the title sponsor of the show, StatHero. I got to be honest, I love March Madness and I love the brackets, but sometimes I can't remember the last time I actually, even won like any money, like at the casino. Being 23 years old, I have done some March Madness betting over at the casino come tournament time over in Southern Indiana. But right now, when I'm planning to go and doing some bets over there, I'm hedging my bets this year with StatHero's NCAA Pick'em contests. StatHero's NCAA single game Pick'ems pits the star players against each other in an amazing hybrid between fantasy and sports gambling. You're able to start focusing on the players you know best with a gameplay that doesn't rely on big spreads, long odds, or funky props. In addition to their pick'em games, they also have dozens of lineups you can comb through to take on head-to-head. It's the easiest and fastest way to get your sports action fix. StatHero is what daily fantasy was simply meant to be. So you can sign up for free right now at stathero.com/lockedon and use the promo code, I believe that is locked on, for a 100% deposit match. That's stathero.com/lockedon. stathero.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. Also want to talk about our friends over at Built Bar. It's usually the time of year that I've kind of given up on the resolutions that I made for myself back in January. But look, it's not this year, because I'm sticking to my resolution to eat right thanks to Built Bar. It almost feels like it's not really a resolution because I actually enjoy eating them. Puffs are the first ever protein-infused marshmallow. They're fluffy, they're marshmallowy. They're not just a protein bar, they're a treat, one of Built Bar's best products, and they're covered in 100% real chocolate, as are all of the Built Bar flavors. They're low calorie, high in protein. You can go to built.com and scroll down to the macros chart, and you'll be blown away by the numbers aspect of it. They're healthier than candy bars, and they flat out taste better than candy bars. At Built Bar, they are all about the taste. They make it taste delicious first, then they figure out how to make it healthy. And I don't know how, but they pull it off every single time. So do yourself a favor. Go to built.com and use the promo code LOCKED15, and you can get 15% off your order. Once again, that's use the promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at built.com. Final segment of the show dedicated to the Monday mailbag. There's some good questions in here. I'm feeling good. I'm wearing my Locked On merch, and I'm trying to get this out. Check out the Locked On brand. I'm trying to escape the microphone in the way, but shout out to Locked On. Thank you for everyone making us your first listen of the day, and be sure to check out all the other amazing shows on the Locked On Podcast Network. Whatever professional team you liked, I promise you the Locked On Network has you covered, with some great hosts on their respective shows. So I want to dive into the mailbag segment of the show. There's a lot of good questions. The first one pertains to college basketball in relation to the hire of a new basketball head coach. It reads, when do you think Louisville will be announcing the hire of the new head coach? I don't know. I don't think anybody knows. I don't think anybody truly knows the date, except for Josh Hurd and maybe those involved in the athletic department. But I will say this, if it happens to be Kenny Payne, I would expect an announcement sooner rather than later. I'm talking like at the end of the season, maybe like a week after or the following week, kind of depending on when Louisville's season ends, when they lose in the ACC tournament, or if they go through the ACC tournament whenever they lose in the NCAA tournament, which is very unlikely, but that's kind of where we're at. If it's anyone else, especially if it's coach coaching in the NCAA tournament, you would have to assume that it would come after their tournament run. So it really just kind of depends. If you see an announcement planned for pre-NCAA tournament, then you probably should expect that it'd be Kenny Payne. But if it's after the NCAA tournament or after a certain team lose, that's when things kind of get a little tricky. So we will transition over into the college baseball side of things, where a person asks, the Louisville Bats seem to wake up against Akron over the weekend. Are you still concerned with this team heading into conference play? I don't know that I ever truly said I was concerned. I remember going on record saying that it might take some time for these guys to start gelling, to get some reps in, to get some at-bats in, and just overall be able to work through some of the kinks of the early season. But I don't necessarily know that I ever used the word concerned, I should say. I do think that a performance, a weekend like this in which the Bats really, really came alive, I do think that can really bode well for the confidence, especially when you've got a midweek matchup against TCU coming up and a weekend series against Michigan. So I wouldn't necessarily say that it alleviates any of my concerns, because I don't necessarily know that I was ever concerned, but it gives me a little bit more of a comfort knowing that these bats are starting to get it together. So the final question, this is probably my favorite question because no one's asked me yet, but it's definitely notable, and it is, can you talk a little bit about Caleb Glenn's progression in his junior season and any other local recruits that we should know about? Well, I plan on doing a segment on Caleb's progression after male season ends. They play Ballard tonight in the 7th region final, so if you have nothing to do, check that out at Valley High School. But to make a long segment short for this particular situation, I think that he's just gotten better in pretty much all aspects. He's gotten stronger, which he's already been a strong guy going back to his freshman season, but more comfortable dealing with double teams. I think his range has expanded. The perimeter shot has gotten a little bit more efficient. The handles have gotten better. I think he's become a better post defender, and overall, I think he's just continuing to get better at every aspect of the game. But the perimeter shooting is probably the thing that stands out the most to me about his overall progression in his junior season, because it adds a whole different dynamic to his game. In terms of some other local guys, I assume local you mean just the Louisville area and not in the state of Kentucky. So I will address it from the 502 perspective. Obviously, George Washington III over at Christian Academy. I was able to announce the male Cal game last week, the first time I was able to see George Washington III in action, in person, and he's everything that he's hyped up to be. He's definitely a high 4-star guy, can create his own shot and does not need a lot of space to do so. A true 3-level scorer with an underrated ability to facilitate. Just a very, very mature basketball player in the sense that handles double teams well, doesn't get flustered, even when he gets he gets the ball stolen or something like that. He's always focused on the next play. He's always focused on getting his teammates involved. So I was extremely impressed with him. Ohio State's getting a good one. Gabe Sisk is another one in the 2023 class that has seen his stock rise a little bit. I think he went on an unofficial visit to Louisville not too awful long ago. But I think he's the real deal. I think that I think he's like in the 6'3" to 6'5" range, very, very good shooter, can create his own shot. I think that, he can go toe-to-toe with the best of them. Really looked solid against Montverde Academy in the, I think it's the City of Palms Invitational on winter break. So it'll be interesting to see whoever the new men's basketball coach is, how well or how much they prioritize Gabe Sisk. But he is a gamer, and he is going to be a high Division I guy, as well as I think Des Lindsey from Male, 6'7" senior that reclassified into the 2022 class. Has refined a lot of parts of his game, like perimeter shooting and ball handling. He's a very, very solid defender and great at penetrating the defense and getting to the rack. So I think he's another guy that's very underrated that could have a very successful career at a high Division I program. So that's going to wrap up this mailbag segment of the show. Couple quick shout outs first to the Cardinal Sports Zone podcast. The most recent episode dropped on Sunday evening. Check that out. As always, I want to say thanks for making Locked On Louisville your first listen every day. Now make your second listen Locked On NFL Draft. Ryan Tracy and former NFL cornerback Eric Crocker bring the NFL Draft to life every day with insight and analysis on college football prospects and NFL front offices. It's free and available wherever you get your podcasts. That's going to wrap up this Monday edition of the show. Everyone have a great week. Go Cards. And we will see you right back here